Right now, while headlines are talking about negotiations with Iran, the United States is moving thousands of troops into the Persian Gulf. That's the story, not diplomacy, not de-escalation, but the quiet setup for a much bigger phase of the war. And if you are watching oil markets or global politics, what happens in the next 2 to 4 weeks could reshape all of it. Because this conflict is not close to ending. In fact, it's just entering its most dangerous stage. Stage 1, the negotiation narrative. Let's start with the negotiations, because that's what everyone is focused on. President Trump recently announced a reopening of talks with Iran. At first glance, that sounds like a step toward peace. It's not. This was about managing a crackdown. Trump had issued a 48-hour ultimatum. Open the Strait of Hormuz or face U.S. strikes on Iranian infrastructure. But here is the problem. The threat was not credible. Gulf states made it clear they would be hit in retaliation. Iran did not budge, no concessions. So the White House needed a way out. That is where talks came in. There were some back-channel contacts, nothing substantial, but enough to justify extending the deadline. Markets rallied, oil stabilized, positioning followed. Then it happened again. Another extension, again framed as diplomacy. But really, it aligned with something much more important. The arrival of U.S. forces in the region. Stage 2. What is actually happening behind the scenes? Right now, there are indirect communication channels forming. One through US envoys, and Iran's foreign minister, facilitated by countries like Pakistan and Turkey. Another possible line through Vice President J.D. Vance, who Iran sees as more skeptical of the war. But here is the key issue. The people actually running Iran's war strategy. The IRGC are not directly engaging. They are not taking calls. They are not exposing themselves. And there is limited clarity on who in Iran can actually commit to a deal. Stage 3. Why a deal isn't coming. The gap between the two sides is not tactical. It is structural. The U.S. wants the Strait of Hormuz fully reopened. That is non-negotiable because global energy flows depend on it. But that strait is Iran's main leverage. Right now, Iran is restricting access while still exporting its own oil at a premium. So if Iran reopens the strait, it loses leverage. If the U.S. backs down, it loses credibility. Neither side can concede. The U.S. is pushing for zero uranium enrichment, full inspections, missile limits. Iran is demanding reparations, security guarantees, U.S. withdrawal. Those are not starting points. Those are end states, and they are completely incompatible. Stage 4, the likely near-term outcome. So what actually happens next? The most likely outcome is a pause, not a ceasefire. Trump could temporarily suspend operations and frame it as giving diplomacy a chance. That would reduce market pressure, ease domestic political risk. For Iran, it's also useful. Fewer strikes, time to stabilize leadership, and space to rebuild capacity. But here is the critical point. A pause does not resolve the core issue. The strait would still be disrupted. Stage 5. Why escalation is more likely. Which brings us to the real story: military escalation. The economic shock is already forming. Oil, gas, petrochemicals, fertilizers, all feeding into inflation and growth risks globally. And politically, Trump is facing a different reality. Oil prices rising, rate cuts off the table, midterm elections likely lost. At that point, the incentive changes. It's no longer about avoiding risk, it's about finding a bigger win. Add in pressure from Israel, support from Gulf states, and optimistic military briefings. And the direction becomes clear. Higher risk tolerance. Stage 6. What a U.S. operation would look like. Timeline, roughly 2 to 6 weeks. Initial targets: disputed islands in the Strait of Hormuz, coastal Iranian positions, and control over key shipping lanes. The goal is not full-scale invasion, it is control of the choke point. But this won't be easy. The environment heavily favors Iran. Dense civilian boat traffic, mountainous terrain, asymmetric threats, and US readiness has limitations, including degraded amphibious capacity. A more aggressive move like taking Karg Island, Iran's main oil export hubs, possible later. But that is far riskier. Stage 7. The strategic endgame. Control of the strait. Control of energy flows. Control of leverage. If the US can dominate Hormuz, it reshapes the global energy system. And strategically, it gives Washington a counterweight to China's dominance. But it depends on one assumption, that Iran cannot effectively respond. And that is far from certain. Iran has already shown adaptability, precision strike capability, and willingness to escalate. If US risk tolerance is rising, so is Iran's. Stage 8. Conclusion. So here is the bottom line. This war is not ending soon. Negotiations are not a resolution strategy. They're a delay mechanism. The trajectory is more escalation, deeper economic disruption, and long-term geopolitical shifts. Markets are not fully pricing this yet. And the next few weeks as troops arrive and decisions get made will be critical. If you are watching oil, inflation, or global risk, this is the story that matters. Because we are not at the end of this conflict. We are at the beginning of its most consequential phase. If you found this useful, subscribe. I will be breaking down what happens next in real time.